Heraclitus was the philosopher of mind and fire, and he said that all was in continual transformation, an everlasting fire kindling in measures and going out in measures. Do you ever think of such things when you contemplate current times? Our civilization is in fast flux now. I tend to think of it all in terms of libertarian social theory, but not just that, obviously. I bring a sort of Heraclitean perspective to social change, which is probably not the norm, which is not to say that libertarianism has stood still since I argued my way into it 4 decades ago, which is why I chatted with Stephan Kinsella. He is almost as old a hand in this political space as I am, and he is more active in the intellectual movement, authoring an oft-quoted treatise against intellectual property, and several important scholarly articles in rights theory. I wanted to ask him about what he thinks of the current complexion of the libertarian movement, but our conversation was itself a thing of flux. My name is Timothy Virkkala, and for The Fire, this is the Locofoco Netcast.
I know I came across this sometime in my upbringing, and it was the idea that, like, the common law, like in England or say in America, if you only had the last, say, 30 years worth of cases, like starting in 2020 going backwards for the last 30 years, and you lost everything before that, you would still have 98% of the common law in the last 30 years of cases, because they always refer back to and repeat the old ones, right?
Right.
But
Right.
I can't find that anywhere. So I don't know where I got that from or what the actual logic was, but it makes sense to me. Maybe I made it up, but I don't think so. I don't want to take credit for something I didn't, but it's sort of like if we lost all the encyclopedias more than 50 years old, we would still probably have most scientific knowledge in the more recent books. You know what I mean?
I hope that's true.
Something like that.
Yeah. Now, you were referring to a particular aphorism about the common law. Do you remember what the aphorism is?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The idea is that all of the common law is embodied in just a recent period of time.
Okay. That
So
sounds like Blackstone.
maybe it might be.
I've never read Blackstone.
I've tried to. It's hard. I find it hard to read antiquated works. Anything more than about 100 years old drives me nuts. Just the way they write and speak.
Okay, that's an interesting problem, considering that I like that period.
No,
150 to 100 years ago, that's my favorite period of
well,
literature.
maybe you can go back about 200, but from basically the founding of the U.S. and before that, the language is so flowery and stilted and formal and different in some ways, right?
Oh, it is very different.
I sort of
Yeah.
wonder if our modern internet and connectedness is going to help, and the fact that we have recordings of people speaking in movies in 1980 and 1960 and 1920, like, is that going to kind of present the drift of language and accents and dialects and all that? Or obviously it won't prevent it, because we keep coming up with new terms, new slang, right?
It has slowed down evolutionary change, and
Okay, well, that's what, yeah, kind of, yeah. So it's like a drift of the language and the
yes,
dialect.
yes,
I think it could slow down the drift of the of the pronunciation. That
yes,
might stay more common, but
yeah,
of course, people are going to always coin new terms.
right, right.
Uh,
That's precisely where we're at. I'm hoping actually to it's part of my linguistic agenda is that when it comes to lexical drift, that is the semantic drift of
mhm,
meanings of terms,
mhm,
I think that terms that are changing for the bad or changing to right now or have been changing for a while,
mhm.
I'm sort of a rearguard action against those changes often because the changes are usually no good. My favorite example is always prodigal. Uh, Most people have really lost what the word means because of one liner note in the King James version of the Bible, but
Mm.
uh, but losing that term has a problem, and the problem is that people lose a concept because now it means something different. It means wayward. It doesn't mean over generous. So that's a problem for us.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually there's probably lots. I know there's lots of examples of that, and I find it interesting. But it is, you could say it's sad, but it's also a natural part of the way language. I mean, we wouldn't have language now if it hadn't developed. But to develop, it has to have a process, and the process involves evolution, right? So,
Right.
but I just wonder if the internet and ubiquitous communication and the way that we have recordings of things now is going to lock it in a certain. Plus, the fact that we have more standardized rules now, right?
Right.
Like if you look at the Constitution, they quote unquote misspell lots of words because it wasn't as standardized back then,
Well,
right?
there wasn't even really any good dictionaries at the time.
Right.
I mean, Webster's hadn't been made, and Johnson's was more literary than useful.
Right. So we have that now. So I wonder if that will. Well, anyway.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think pronunciations have slowed down. Pronunciation changes have slowed down a great deal.
Well, I'm always mystified that like we still have. I don't know how many languages are there spoken on the earth. Maybe 5,000 or something, or 1,000.
There's quite a few.
English has sort of become the lingua franca, I guess. A universal second language instead of Esperanto, right, or instead of French. But
Right.
but people keep their local dialects going.
Some do, others go, and then of course we weep tears for the passing of some languages. Most of those tears are not necessary, but some of them might be. Some of them we may be losing some important things. I wonder about what was lost when Sumerian ceased being spoken. It's just an interesting time. It's an interesting thing that we have a language in the past that has no relationship to any modern language.
Well, what about Latin? I mean, Latin, in a way, is the most important language of all, you could argue, but I don't think anyone really speaks it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
People study it, but they don't really speak it, really.
Right. Well, for one thing, we have two forms of Latin, and that's a problem because the big difference was how do you pronounce the words. So we say Cicero, but the Latins, the Romans said Cicero.
Wasn't there some funny gaffe that George Bush or someone made when he said something like he thought in Latin America they spoke Latin or something like that?
Probably.
And I think I heard some study from some linguist a few years ago. The idea was that if you look at the way the pronunciation of English has changed over the centuries, the theory is that the way that the actors, let's say in Shakespeare's time, would have spoken was closer to the current American accent than the current British accent or English accent.
Yeah.
And but we don't know because we don't have recordings. But you can figure some things out from the way some things are written down when they try to do. They try to imitate what things sound like. What's that? I forgot the word, but the word for trying to express how something sounds.
Well, phonetics.
Yeah, just phonetically. So there's clues in writing that give you a clue to the way the accent was back in those days, and they think that it was closer to the current American accent than English. So we're speaking the way Shakespeare used to speak, or something like that.
Well, sort of. So, though I think that there was a lot of some things like the OUGHs, the GH sounds were actually pronounced back in those times, and no one pronounces them at all, except maybe in Scotland or something. I don't know what the hell they're doing.
It's still fast. I think it's fascinating. It's like one of these things. I don't know how you. I always think of like 5 or 6 careers I could have majored in or done that would have been a whole different life. But like being an astrophysicist, maybe, or a professor at Oxford, or something, or wrestling.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think about those things a lot as well, because of course, the longer you live, the number of opportunities dwindles fast.
Yeah, because the forks, you keep eating up your opportunity cost forks, and like I will never be a Navy SEAL at this point.
Right.
It's too late.
Say that with 100% certainty.
Yeah. Probably never
That's an
could have been
interesting.
anyway. But anyway,
Yeah, I don't think I could have either, just simply because of certain structural problems like weak ankles, things like that.
yeah.
Well, anyway, here we are. It's the end of August 2020, and I'm
Is it?
talking with you and
You actually know the
welcome you
date.
to.
That's
Well, I
important.
don't know the exact date.
It's
I
the
mean,
twenty
that's
seventh.
a
I
bit
just checked. It's August the 27th.
I like to be vague about this because it'll take me a while to get this thing up online.
Well, just for posterity, Hurricane Laura just missed Houston last night and went to Lake Charles. So we have a nice sunny day here in Houston. I had my bad bathtubs full of water. I went and bought 15 gallons of water. I had beans, and we were prepared for a major hurricane, but it went to Lake Charles instead. So
Well,
that's what today is for me. It's the day of not being hit by a hurricane.
very good. Today is a nice day for me as well, but we had no hurricane warnings on deck. I'm here and I'm not mowing the lawn. That's the real significant thing for me, is that right now I'm talking with you and not mowing the lawn. So that's a much lower level life event and life opportunity there.
You mow your own lawn.
Well, not really. That's the problem, is that the guy I have mows the lawn hasn't been mowing the lawn. So so somebody's got to
You
do
have
it.
a lawnmower. You have a lawnmower
Oh yeah. I have several actually.
for the same reason you have all these Macintoshes.
Well, kind of. Mainly because I loathe small engines, that is, gasoline-powered engines. Don't like them. I don't like the way they work. So I've been moving towards
Right.
electric. If I have to do something.
Oh yeah, my neighbor has one of those electric little lawnmowers. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
The problem for me with I actually had toyed with the idea of buying one of those old push reel ones because I have such a small lawn because we live in the city. But the problem is you still have to pay people to do the weeding and all the other stuff, otherwise, unless you want to do all that, which I don't want to. So it would save me like literally no money, because the lawn mowing part is not anywhere near a significant part of the cost I pay these guys to maintain all the stuff my wife has in the yard. So I gave up. Plus, I mowed 4 or 5 acres of lawns when I was a kid, week after week after week in the hot Louisiana sun, and I'm glad I did it. But when I grew up and got a real job, I said I'm not going to change my own oil anymore, and I'm not going to ever mow grass again.
That's a life goal that I can understand. That is certainly one that I can understand.
And my dad, of course, is eternally upset with me about that. But you going to Jiffy Lube? Yes, Dad.
I do.
Don't you know how to change your own oil? I said, yeah, I know how because I did it, but I don't want to do it anymore.
Right. I actually have to change the air filter on my car myself because it's a peculiar
Yeah.
air filter. I can't let it be done by anyone else, and that's kind of, and so it's been 2 months and I haven't done it, so that's kind of unfortunate.
Well, if you have the right equipment and the right setup, you got your ramp. You got to have the ramps and you got to have the right tools and the
Oh
right
yeah.
stuff.
Oh, yeah.
If you know what you're doing and you enjoy it, okay. But I think the modern cars, in a way, they're better, but in a way, they're worse, right? Because they don't need as much maintenance usually, but it's also not possible for a normal guy to.
Oh yeah.
But you
Getting in an engine,
have some old classic Ford Model T or something, right?
even cars, from the 70s, you open a hood and it's sparse and beautiful under there, and you can get to everything almost.
Right.
Now you do that and you look at it and it looks like you're dealing with Metropolis. It's
Yeah.
just it's a convoluted mess of things that's beyond my comprehension.
Yeah.
So we've already strayed several times before we even get to the start.
So the Kinsella does this quite often lately. Kinsella is a mischief creator.
Which is okay, I guess.
Yeah.
But before we get to the meat of what I wanted to talk about, because I do have issues that you know something about, but you also have written a book. It's coming out. Is that correct?
Which one?
There's a law book. You're coming out. I saw it briefly on my screen the other
I got my
day.
copy literally yesterday. It finally came. It was published in March in Oxford, and I didn't get my copy until yesterday. And I was wondering if it was actually published. They told me it was published, but I'm like, well, it's August. I haven't seen a copy. I don't know. So it finally reached me. So yeah, it came out It came out either in March or yesterday, however you date it.
So what is that called?
International. Hold on, I'll go get it. It's right here in the kitchen. I have two.
Okay.
They sent me 2 copies, and they're $250 each. So I have to decide what to do with the second one.
Yeah.
Probably give it to my dad. I mean, whoever I give it to won't read it, so I guess it doesn't matter from that point of view. I'll show you another thing I just got too. It's kind of cool because you're into publishing and editing and all this. So here's the book.
That's an impressive looking book. That's the kind of thing you see in law libraries.
Yeah.
Oxford. And the title is International
Investment, Political Risk and Dispute Resolution, A Practitioner's Guide, 2nd edition.
Okay.
I published the 1st edition in 2005, so it took me 15 years to find a third co-author to update it. So he did all the work of updating it. This guy from Noah Rubens and I did the 1st edition in 2005.
Okay.
And Noah is an American lawyer living in Paris, extremely smart and one of the world's greatest international arbitration attorneys. Although coincidentally, he was born in Louisiana because he had a military dad. He was passing through, got born on a military base there, but he has otherwise no connection. He has like highfalutin degrees. And the other guy is Thomas, is a law professor in Cyprus, who is also written. He's younger, so he has the energy, and he wrote. So he did most of the work on updating.
And that is quite a name. Let's just say that is a name and a mouthful.
Thomas Nectarios Papanastasiou.
Yeah, I was glad that you pronounced that.
He must be Greek. I think Cyprus is half Greek and half Turkish or something. Yeah. So, and I just got this a couple days ago. This is the print version of the final volume of Libertarian Papers, because we stopped publishing it last year. So we published our 10th and final volume last year.
Interesting. I've never even seen a copy. That's pretty cool.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Is it backwards to you?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
But to me, it's backwards.
Yeah.
So I paid someone to do the file, and it's 430 or 40 pages. But it's amazing. You can use Amazon's Kindle digital publishing platform and just publish a book.
Yeah.
It's just
how
incredible.
Much are you charging for Libertarian Papers, the last volume?
I charge what we charge for all the previous ones, $19.95.
Okay.
And I think I get maybe $6 per copy or something, with the way they do the cost.
Now,
because it's print on demand.
Right. I've seen a number of contents pages. It's quite a variety of stuff. A lot of it seemingly quite recondite.
What does that mean, recondite?
Well, let's just say that it seems to be of a high professional scholarly quality. That is, the subjects dealt with and the manner in which they're dealt seems to be not written for the masses. This is definitely technical stuff.
No, it was more like journal of Libertarian Studies. Right. It's more like or reason papers. It's more that kind of
right
stuff. Yeah.
I love those two journals, Journal of Libertarian Studies. In fact, I just read an article of yours from 1996 that appeared in the JLS.
Oh, the one on new rationalist directions in libertarian.
No, it was on punishment.
Oh, okay.
Was that 90? Well, was that earlier?
I don't remember. That sounds about right. But so that's going to appear in modified form so I have another book coming out probably in 2 months on my libertarian stuff called Law in a Libertarian World. And I'm working on that right now. I've been saying that for 8 years, but I actually have 2 people hired that are helping me with the cover and the layout and the bibliography and the indexing. So I'm actually, coronavirus has helped me do that. So, but that article, I published it in the JLS, but then maybe 3 months later, I modified it a little bit and I published it in a law review, the Loyola of Los Angeles Law Review.
Oh.
And I'm combining those 2 for the book because there's some stuff that's in one that's not in the other. Like I had to take out some of the radical stuff for the law review. but because it was later, I had a few updated footnotes or something like that. So I remember when I submitted it, I've over the years, I've published several law review articles on legal topics, standards, legal stuff, or even stuff like this. And I play these games, or I've learned to play these games with these publishers. Like, for example, law reviews are usually edited by the law students, so they're not always like, it's a weird system. Okay, and you could submit like 100 to 100 law reviews at the same time, unlike in the humanities. It's a whole different system. But
Oh,
so I submitted this article and I called it a theory of rights or something like that. No, a theory of punishment. And then when they accepted it for publication, during the editing process, I simply told one of these law students, okay, would you just add the word libertarian in the title? Because I didn't want to submit it to them with that in the title. So now, so the law student didn't know the difference. He, okay, fine. So it's a libertarian theory of punishment and rights or something like that. But I didn't. I didn't tip my hat when I submitted it, you know. And there's another one like 20 years ago, and I used the pronoun he, like as the generic, like, oh, as an example, he would do this. And they tried to change it to he/he, she, or to she, and I fought with them on it. And so what they did was they let me keep my toxic masculine style, but they dropped a footnote and they said, editor's note, the author has insisted that we keep the word he here, or something like that. So that's in the article, like a note from the law review. This is 20 years ago, before
before it got crazy.
Me Too went crazy. Yeah. And I probably couldn't get away with that now. At least they
Right.
let me win, but they had to drop a snide footnote.
Right. Now, I think it was in Jan Narveson that I first saw a college professor, scholarly writing in
Yeah.
which all the examples were she, uh, because most of the citations were of male writers. So all the examples, the hypothetical examples,
Yeah.
all were she.
Yeah. And I've seen that. And you'll see that on occasion nowadays with some left libertarians. And, sometimes it's okay, but sometimes it's strained, especially if it's if you're talking about college football or something. It's like, what if she doesn't get admitted to the program? It's like, come on.
Yeah, I remember I was actually politically active back in the early 90s or late 80s in Port Townsend, Washington, and I helped out a bunch of anti-nuke people and, anti-bomb kind of stuff. And they wanted a form letter, just a form card printed
Mm-hmm.
out so everybody could use it easily. And I did.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the women says, but you say he here. And it says, we're addressing an actual representative of the United States, and it's a male. It's a man. Oh, okay, she said.
Is
I
that
mean,
permissible? Right.
yeah, it was just bizarre that her first instinct was to object to the sole male referent when we were dealing with a man. It was odd.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of that these days
Yeah.
because people are just so, well, it is political correctness, which is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about on this episode of the Locofogo Netcast, is the polarization in society and within the libertarian movement. Because you've had you're in the libertarian movement pretty thick and deal with a lot of libertarians, and you often complain about some libertarians and their odd ways of going about debating and talking with other people.
I sometimes wonder if I'm really a libertarian, because when I talk to some libertarians, I feel alienated. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think I'm used. Of course, I'm a libertarian, but I think that libertarian for me might mean something different. I think there's an activist type of libertarian, right? And of course, all the stuff I've done, you could say I'm more activist than most of them, but not activist in the terms of the political party movement stuff. Like, they're like basically radicalized Republican blue-haired women who run around with stickers on their car and T-shirts, and they go to rallies and they vote and they get behind a candidate and think they're going to win and march, that kind of stuff. So that's one maybe difference between. I mean, I've always been more academic and intellectual and into the theory stuff, and I thought that was what libertarianism was, because that was what attracted me to it. That's how I learned. I mean, you're a little bit older than me, so you've been in this movement probably longer than I have. So maybe you were Liberty Magazine and all that. But even Liberty Magazine, I wouldn't say it was scholarly, but it was definitely for intelligent libertarians and written by a lot of intelligent libertarians, right?
That was literally how we thought of it.
And
Yes.
parts of it were scholarly. And so the impression I have of the libertarian movement is, in the beginning, it was very tiny and small and nascent, and not even called that. Ayn Rand's in the 50s and 60s, Leonard Read, Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, all emerging. Then the libertarian movement sort of coalesced with the growing influence of Rand and Milton Friedman and the Foundation for Economic Education, and then others like Rothbard and Ethan Mises and Hayek and all that. And I still think it was way smaller then than it is now, bigger than it was in the beginning. It wasn't just 20 people in the world, but it was, thousands. But they were probably on average less radical than today's libertarians are, but they were more intellectual. First of all, most of them had read most of the relevant stuff because there was less relevant stuff to have read, right?
Oh yeah, surely.
Like
yes.
there was only a couple dozen things that you need to have read to basically have completed, 82% of the corpus of libertarian main thought. Now there's so much, which is good, but it's like the Ron Paul movement sort of kind of took over, and the activists and the students, and so there's more of them, and in a way there's more anarchists, I think, than there used to be, but no one's ever read anything. Like they're listening to things like this, like YouTube channels and podcasts, and I don't know. Is that your impression? Do you think that that's kind of correct?
Yes, though I just think it's partly a response of the internet, because when we were young and interested in the ideas of libertarianism and libertarian ideas of all sorts, in fact, almost all political ideas, where do we go to? We had to go to literature, and we had to go to reading. We had to do reading. Right. But nowadays, you can go to a podcast like this one, or right. better, like Dave Smith or somebody who's really popular,
right?
And you've gotten some information. You've sated your desires for learning something about liberty, so you don't need to go further. We were desperate, so we we went a long ways in various directions. But nowadays,
Laissez-faire Books catalog, I think, was one of the major essential drivers of the movement, in a sense, right? It was like an essential resource. I don't know how many books and even audio tapes I bought from them in the 80s and 90s. It was crazy.
I never bought an audio tape.
That's how you had to do things.
Did they sell audio tapes as well?
Yeah, not a lot, but yeah, there were some. Sure, yeah, okay. Like the debate that John Ridpath and Leonard Peikoff did in 1984.
Oh,
or maybe I got that from Ayn Rand groups or something. But no, there were definitely some audio tapes there.
Okay.
But you had to go through some effort, and if you wanted to contact someone, you would write them a letter. I remember. This is crazy. I mean, one of my best friends still to this day is a guy named Jack Criss, who's he was an objectivist kind of guy, but like a fellow libertarian guy my age, in Jackson, Mississippi, and I was living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is about four hours away. This is not. And I remember I was writing to David Kelly in hand, but through the mail, an objectivist philosopher up in New York, and asking him questions because there wasn't email or the internet or whatever. And David Kelly wrote me and he said, "Hey, there's another objectivist libertarian guy in Jackson, Mississippi, like 4 hours away from you. Why don't you contact him?" And that's what I did. And so Jack and I became friends. But I had to find a guy a whole state away just to meet and have some common interest and to talk and to become buddies with,
Interesting.
But I hate these, old guys that say, "Oh, in my day," but it's really, I heard Tom Woods interview some guy the other day on his podcast who's like 38. Tom's about 40 something. So they're not that young, but they're not that old. But they, at least Tom remembers. He remembers the pre-internet days, and he had a point that the good thing about that is that if you've seen both sides of it, you actually sort of appreciate what we have now and how amazing it is. But all these young kids come up and they just take it for granted, right? Which they probably should, but they don't even understand. Like, do you understand? You had to send physical mail. You had to. We didn't have laser printers even. We had maybe a dot matrix at best, but
Right.
it was a whole different system. There was nothing instant and on demand. You couldn't watch a YouTube clip of the latest Johnny Carson show. If you missed it, it was gone forever.
Right. I actually bought a microfiche reader so that I could get stuff from John Zub in Australia.
John Zub, who's that?
He was a pusher of panarchism, and he had lots of radical literature, anarchist, individualist, just a lot of stuff available on in microform.
So he would send you like
I bought microfiche
with microfiche.
Yeah, and I read Lysander Spooner in microfiche, and Depew, and all sorts of people.
Well, that's another thing is that, like, okay, so you're rare, like your interest in that is very rare. So there was no market for it, basically. That's why it was in this inaccessible format, right?
Right.
So, but nowadays with the internet, even if something only has a very, very narrow niche interest, it can still be easily accessible now. You can even have print on demand books for it. It's
Well, it's the long tail, is what they say.
You ever buy these books that like they're in the public domain now because they're like 150 years old, but it's just someone took this library copy of some old book and they just photocopied it or scanned it, and they turned it into a print on demand book, and you buy it, and it's like it's no editing, there's no searchable text, it's just basically, but it's a nice carbon copy basically of an old book. Not carbon copy, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a photocopy, but for like $7. So okay, this works.
Yeah,
at least you can get it. You can build your own library if you want to easily.
Right.
It's
now,
crazy.
I tend to buy, with 19th century books, I tend to buy them on the used book market, and they're pretty cheap these days because most people are getting things online, so that there's no great rarity value in this stuff. But I have bought probably a dozen or a half dozen of those kind of books you're talking about.
Where's if you want to buy an actual physical copy of an old book that was actually physically published in paper like 100 years ago, do you get it on Amazon, or what's the main
I usually go to Abe Books.
Abe Books. Okay. I figured they had gone like I figured that was a temporary thing. I haven't been there, and I used to go there too in the old days, but then I figured Amazon sort of would have taken over. But
I buy probably 3/4 of my books from Abe Books.
Huh. I might check them out, because every now and then there's a book I want which I can't find, and it perplexes me because nowadays we expect everything to be available, even some obscure thing, and I'm like, how can I not find this? Or you'll find a weird copy on Amazon for like $1,500, and you're like, I don't even know if it exists. I'm not going to pay that, but I don't even know if it's real. Like, something is off here, Okay, Abe Books.
Yeah.
Check them out again.
My great white whale has been Pareto for years. I don't have a lot of Pareto. There's not a lot been translated from him. I have his sociological treatise in 4 volumes, but his manual of political economy, which is sort of one of the key texts of the 20th century economics, which I kind of like to have just simply to go through at least half of it. I had several chances back in the 80s and 90s to buy copies for used copies for $20, $25, $30, something like that. And I thought, I'm not going to spend $25, $35 on that book. Well,
and now you'd love the opportunity to do that.
Well, I've missed it several times, and now the things are going online, in the used book market for $60 and more. And that's where my margin of indifference is now. $60.
Are you taking donations for your channel? You should maybe ask the readers. Give you $60 the listeners. You need a $60 donation to buy some Pareto.
Maybe I should. It should be my Pareto fund.
It would be Pareto optimal.
Yeah, there you are.
Now, was that in English or was it translated?
Well, it was translated. It was he wrote in French, I believe, because he was a Swiss. He was Switzerland. Lausanne School. Well, actually, he was Italian who taught in Switzerland and wrote in French, I believe. He wrote a 2-volume attack on socialism that's not been translated.
Well, this is the other thing that drives me nuts. There are some works that are only available in, I don't know, German or French or something, and I don't speak those languages, and there's no good translation or translation that I'm aware of, and so it's very frustrating. I mean, it must be. I guess it's even worse. I don't know. Do you think it's worse to be English like us and be monolingual? Are you monolingual or?
I'm pretty much monolingual, yes.
So we're trapped in one language, but on the other hand, almost everything is in English or translated in English. Not everything, but almost. But I wonder if, like, let's say you're French, or on the other hand, most of them speak English too.
Yes.
So, but imagine if you're not fluent in English and you're German or French or Spanish or something like that, or Chinese. I mean, I don't think like the translation process works symmetrically. Like, I don't think everything that's great in English is translated into Chinese. Maybe some key works, but not everything. So what else did you? I thought you wanted to talk about, like, maybe our kind of, was it the origins of our libertarian experiences, or what was the main thing you wanted to chat about today?
Well,
I forgot.
Yeah, we get sidetracked somehow. But no, mainly I'm interested in what your thoughts. We have touched on this, the idea of a polarization in the libertarian movement, or a multipolarization in the libertarian movement, and you've already mentioned that you're alienated from aspects of the libertarian constituency right now.
Well, oh yeah, you were asking me about some of my criticisms of, and look, I tease my own people, but look, our politicians aren't always the best, say, quality politicians in terms of their political talent. But there's a reason for that, right? It's because if you have that kind of talent, you're going to direct it towards the Democrat or Republican Party so that you can use it, So it's just a natural process. I don't blame libertarians for that. Yeah, and I tease libertarians for being libertarian sometimes too. It's almost like this criticism some of the boomers have of millennials, like, oh, they're lazy and they smoke pot too much and they couch surf and they're always trying to skip paying the tab for dinner, and it's not really. I mean, I've gone to so many conferences. I've been to PorcFest. I went to Libertopia, even the hippie ones. I loved it. I love these guys. But libertarians are a unique breed. I think sometimes I see them through the lens of the eyes of people that I'm with that are normal, like colleagues and neighbors and family members who are just not into this. And you can see how they see us libertarians. Like, when I start telling them about what I experienced at this conference or at this event, their eyes kind of like, oh, and then you start realizing that we're not like the others. And I don't know why or exactly how. And I probably shouldn't be so critical because they're my people, That's why I joined the Libertarian Party, I think, last year after Tom Woods and these guys did it. And I've been fighting that for 35 years because I don't think politics is the way to make change. But I finally thought, you know what? These are my people. These are my peeps. They're fighting for liberty in their own way. Why not just join the party? I mean, after all, I've been voting. When I vote, I usually vote Libertarian if there's a reasonable candidate running. So what does it hurt? I mean, I know they're minarchists. They're not that principled. There's a lot of people that have dumb ideas about political activism's efficacy.
What do you think of the SJW tendencies among the current crowd in the LP, especially Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I probably think what you think about it. I roll my eyes at it. I think that's what you get when you have people that are ass kissing too much, right? They're trying to be respectable and mainstream, or they're just not that radical, or they're not that theoretical or intellectual or principled. I don't see that much of that kind of thing among the really like theory type libertarians that are really smart and radical, except some of the left libertarians. They will do that too, but I think they're trying to ass kiss to the commies and the socialists, like, hey, we're one of you. We can. I don't know.
Well, many of them are in
I
teaching in college, right? So that they're around SJWs all the time, right?
that may be part of it, and I think they're trying to. I guess I've always been in your face, like what did Michael Cloud call it, the macho libertarian flash. Like that's what attracted me to it, was the fact that it's different and that it's principled, and yeah, it's different, and it might make you uncomfortable, and it should. I mean, if you're in favor of the drug war, you're in favor of literally killing people or putting them in cages for doing something that you just don't like. I mean, it's, I don't understand why some libertarians want to sugarcoat this crap.
But SJWism isn't sugarcoating that so much as saying that racism, being anti-racism, is an integral part of being a libertarian, which I don't think it is. I don't think it is at all.
No, I think that, yeah, I think that's a different issue. I think by sugarcoating, I mean, some people, they will talk about this stuff as a way to avoid upsetting people with the stuff that we believe that they don't like, you don't want welfare, you don't want a minimum wage, you don't want income taxes, you don't want the government's paying for the roads. So they can say, well, yeah, but we also agree with you that racism is. But I think the other thing you're talking about is this thickism idea, right? Like
Yeah.
And probably the best libertarian that still advocates some version of this, but it's like, say, Roger Long, who's a friend of mine, and he's a left libertarian, so he's radical. Like, he even likes Ayn Rand novels and this kind of pro-capitalist stuff. But he allies himself with these Kevin Carson guys and these guys that they just hate capitalists, and they use these kind of philosopher vague terms, like it's almost like the equivocation thing. Like, they'll say, well, you're against aggression, but that's a form of oppression, so you're against oppression, right? I guess. Well, it's also oppressive to have a hierarchical institution where the man tells the wife what to do, and the employer bosses his people around. After all, you're against bossing people around, aren't you? So they do this kind of equivocation thing, and I think it's total nonsense. I was on a podcast yesterday with the Birding Boots guys, and these guys are young, irreverent, funny, smart, and they said, "Hey, do you think Hans Hermann Hoppe is a racist?" And I want to say, just, of course not. He's a good friend of mine, and of course not. I want to defend him, but to be honest, I'm not even sure anymore what racism really is. And to the extent it has any meaning, most people are racist by most of the standards. If you're a black woman, a black dad who doesn't want his daughter marrying a white guy, is that racist? I mean, it is by the standards of the hyper thin, right? But so to me, I just go back to libertarianism. Like, I'm against any law that violates people's rights, and some of them have a disproportionate effect on black people. And of course, we're against that, but we're against it because it's aggression. So, and in fact, most of the people that say they're not racist support laws that hurt black people, like the welfare system, right? Or like the drug war. It's sort of like the environmentalists who says they're against climate change, but they're not in favor of nuclear energy. So it's like, either you're stupid or you're not sincere. I don't know which one it is. You tell me. And so if you're really against racism, you should be against the drug war first and foremost, like something like that, because that would have the biggest, and against the welfare system even, right? And things that have disproportionate effects on blacks. So, but again, that goes back to a legal theory, or like a rights idea. So I'm against any immoral law that has an effect on people that hurts them. And sometimes they're racial in effect. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the reason we have the problems we have now is primarily because we had slavery, I think. And this is all the result of the stupid practice, the evil practice we had of bringing slaves over from Africa 300 years ago. Okay, now we're dealing with the effects of that. I didn't want to prevaricate and maunder on this thing, but I was like, well, I don't think he's a racist. I mean, he's married to a Turkish Muslim, and his social views you might not agree with, but he's just a libertarian, like we all are. Or so, to me, the question is not if someone's a racist; it's do they have the power to implement it by force, right?
Right.
And of course, I never understand why people can't get the basic. It's the elementary economic logic of a Henry Hazlitt, like about why the minimum wage hurts people. Well, by the same token, if you really think women are being or blacks are being discriminated against and by being paid, say, lower wages for the same job, don't you understand that another competing employer could simply gobble them up and take advantage of this stupid, senseless differential? And everyone blows it up. They go, well, not everyone's rational like you think they are. They have these stupid. It's like, it's not about being rational. It's about the way economics and the free market work. You get punished. It's expensive to be racist, basically, if it's irrational.
But if it does signal something else, I mean, that's one of the tricky parts of racism today is that sometimes it's not racism,
something
right?
else, then it's not really. It would probably be called racist, but I don't think it's wrong or irrational. I mean, remember, there's that famous quote from Jesse Jackson back, I guess, when Bill Clinton was running or something. He said, when I'm walking down a sidewalk in a big city late at night, I see a group of black kids coming, I get nervous. Like, he was confessing that. But he's basically just admitting the fact that we make snap judgments sometimes based upon imperfect information, and we take statistics into account. Young black males are more of a threat than some old white lady with a cane. I mean, everyone knows these things.
Right, but there is sort of a prohibition on talking about some of this honestly, and I don't find SJWism.
I know.
That's actually one of my complaints about the social justice mindset is that it's just another. It reminds me so much of conservatism as I grew up, of the people who thought that you couldn't say certain things. I mean, you weren't supposed to swear. You weren't supposed to.
Right.
You weren't. And living in sin was just the worst thing in the world. I mean, there's all these things that prohibitions that they had culturally, and they came off as authoritarians, in my opinion.
Well, and I think the latest version of that is this transsexual thing. I've had people attack me on Facebook just for saying some innocuous. If you use the word tranny or what, listen, I personally, I'm not an expert on this crap. I don't really care. I'm a live and let live guy. I'm tolerant. I'm polite to people, but I don't quite get this Stalinist insistence on this Orthodox party line about this distinction between gender and sex. Okay. And I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I don't think you can change your gender. I don't think it's fluid. I don't believe it. I could be wrong. I don't give a fuck. I really don't care. I mean, people can do what the fuck they want, but if but I think homosexuality, for example, sexual preference is one thing. I think some people are actually gay and they don't choose their preference. And hey, it's their life to live. But I don't think you can't choose your identity. Like, you can't just, like, it was like that. Who was the woman, Rachel Dolezal, who pretended to be black? She said, well, I identify as black. And they have all these words like, I present as black, or I present as, I mean, hell, look at freaking Kamala Harris. Look at Obama. Obama's half white and half black, and yet people call him black. Where does that get established? And then Kamala Harris is what, half Indian and
Yes.
half Jamaican or something like that.
Right, and
And
Jamaican
you have
is
people,
partly European, right? Mainly European in her case.
right? So, and as far as I can tell, she's married to a white guy, and yet now people are calling her African American. I'm like, how exactly is she African American?
Well, that's of
So
course just nonsense. I mean, but they're doing it because it's cool to be black. Of course, she is darker skinned, so I don't really. Once again, I'm in your camp. I don't really care how you parse that out, though I find it often funny. I believe I have the right to laugh at
yeah,
how you present
yeah,
yourself, and you have the right to
yeah,
laugh at how I present myself. But most of the time, we're
yeah.
not going to laugh, right? That's just how it is. We don't have the right to hit each other over the head, and that's kind of where we're at.
They'll play this game where they'll say, well, you don't have to agree with me, but you can at least respect someone's choice to be called what they want to be called. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And in person, I will do that. It's just a question of politeness and manners and discourse between people. But that's not what you said. You said that gender is a social construct and that and you can choose your gender, and then that has consequences because then they want to put it into law, like the bathroom thing. And I agree that's not a big deal probably, but it's going to have it does have an effect in sports and things like this, and it over time it's going to have more of an effect. It's probably always going to be a marginal minor thing, but I don't know. But just because you don't agree that people can change that your gender depends on what you just announced to the world, right? And now there's 72 or something in some jurisdictions.
Yeah.
Like there's Wiccan or it seems like the whole thing seems like a joke a science fiction or fantasy writer would have made up in a novel about an alternate universe. Like it seems like preposterous. Like, are you guys serious? Like, how do you know that you're gender number 17 instead of number 29? Or how do you know? And what keeps it from changing from day to day? It's like if someone said, my name is Symbol on Tuesdays and Ralph on Thursdays, and they expect you to keep up with this ridiculous barrage of rules, and which they might change every 2 days because you have to. Otherwise, you're being not respectful of their ability to present themselves to the world. So I just find it ridiculous. It was like when Prince changed his name to the stupid symbol that was unpronounceable, and it was a new symbol. It wasn't even like Omega or something. It was just so people started calling him. Remember, Symbol Man or
the artist who was formerly Prince.
Yeah, some tap or some acronym. What else are you supposed to do? I mean,
yeah, no.
So
yeah, I consider gender theory to be preposterous because I think it's inherently confused. These people don't know what they're talking about. They present a definition of gender. Well, you've seen my writings on the subject. They present a definition of gender, and then they don't follow it, but they do have an interesting idea in the background. What they fear once again is oppression, is bad feelings from other people, and our roles and how people look at us is socially constructed. That is, other people often do define us, and these are people who want to define themselves. But because they're not individualists and they have basically no spine, they have to define themselves by some new category, a gender. That's what gender and category are pretty much the same kind of idea. And so they come up with these new concepts, the categorizations for themselves, and that they try to define themselves. I like people defining themselves. I have no problem with it. But when they pretend that they're making a new universal law of a Kantian nature or a scientific nature, they're idiots.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I view it. It's almost like these people that, and this has been around for decades in my experience. People that say, like, you'll say, "Well, are you a socialist? Are you a libertarian? Are you a Republican?" And they'll say, "Oh, I don't like labels. I just like to." It's like, well, if you say you don't like labels, what you're saying is you don't like concepts. I mean, labels are just words that are they connect to conceptual identification of reality. We're conceptual beings. So what do you mean you don't like labels? So I kind of joked that, oh, so you're an anti-labeler, and they of course that frustrates them. Like, well, I guess I'm an anti-labeler. Yeah, this whole gender thing, it doesn't drive me that nuts, to be honest, because it's not the biggest problem we have now, but it doesn't cost us that much yet that I can see. Although I guess a more interesting question is I've been paying it. A more interesting phenomena is this: the battles it's causing within the left. Like you have these feminists, like the TERFs, right? The trans exclusionary radical feminists, like
Yeah, I like
and
them.
I like them too, and I guess like my friend Nina Paley's one, or accused of being one, and who's the Harry Potter author? J.K. Rowling is been getting all this flack because they don't want their feminist agenda hijacked by men
Dudes.
with penises who claim that they're women. I mean, I kind of sympathize with the feminists, but I and then and of course the hyper left is calling them you're not fighting with our fellow sisters. Like, well, they're not your sisters.
Yeah,
I mean, you honestly have people saying, like, I think I heard some political campaign, it was a Democrat thing, I believe, and it was like some warning about cervical cancer, but instead of saying women should be checked for this, they said persons who have a cervix should be checked for this. Like they didn't even want to say women because, of course, some men might have a cervix now. Just like abortion rights are not only for women anymore, because some men might need to get an abortion because they have a uterus.
right.
So
It's absurd. Part of the deal, though, is with the trans movement. There's a trans acceptance movement that's gone into a trans demand movement. That is, we must accept.
right,
But the thing is that though I like trans people, all the trans people I've met, this is rather like Muslims. I like all the Muslims I've ever met. But that doesn't mean I
yeah,
like Islam, and it doesn't mean that I like
right.
trans acceptance. And I'm actually against trans acceptance because to me, trans is getting close to fraud. And I think that this is a problem for people: is that you may be able to display however you want, but if you're saying you're something you're not in a contractual situation, that's fraud. And I don't like it just as a cultural thing. I think it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that's roughly my view. I don't disbelieve that some people have gender dysphoria or whatever you call it, and they get confused and they need to be dealt with a certain way and handle. I don't like if you have a kid who is a boy and he wants to act like a girl and dress like a girl. There's got to be a humane and a rational way of dealing with that, right? And I don't know what it is, but it's not to lie about reality and to pretend like.
Or then certainly not to give hormone replacement therapy at age 12 or whatever they're doing, messing with their own.
I guess as a strong libertarian, I'm a little bit torn on that one, because I don't really exactly believe. I mean, as a practical father and a person in the world, yeah, I agree with you. But if you believe in Rothbard's idea that a 4-year-old has the right to emancipate himself by saying no and running away, I guess that it's a question of jurisdiction. Like who has the right to decide? I mean, I think it's a horrible mistake for a 12-year-old or a 6-year-old to do this physical transition. It's probably a mistake for most adults to do it, to be honest. I mean, these trans advocates, they admit that this, like the suicide rate, the depression rate for trans people is way higher. And you can't blame it all on the fact that they're just not accepted, they're shunned in society, right? It can't all be that.
Right.
In fact, I don't think it's that at all. I think it's that their wires are twisted. And I mean, I think the same thing about homosexuality, to be honest. I think it's some kind of crossing of the wires in the brain, and that's why that also is correlated with more depression and more psychological problems. Doesn't mean that they should be treated with less respect or not treated as fellow humans or can't live good lives. But why can't we have opinions about these things? I mean, until recently, they were considered mental disorders, right? Or they probably still are, or at least like in the what is that, the manual in the U.S. medical or psychological, the manual of all the disorders.
DSM? I forget what it's called.
Yeah, I think it's that. I mean, schizophrenia. Well, I mean, you could say, oh, someone's a schizophrenic. They just present as having several personalities. You could normalize anything you want.
Right.
I guess the real question is, if you're a decent, normal parent, would you want your kid to have this? Like, would that be your dream ideal? You know, like, there are retarded kids. There are kids that are born missing an arm or have with a deformity, and we treat them with compassion and we help them and we try to accept them into society. But it doesn't mean you want your kid to be born with that.
Right.
I mean, if two gay guys have a kid, do you think they want the kid to be gay? I think probably they don't.
Well, some do, some don't. I don't know about that because we have a lot of women out there right now, mothers, who want their child to be trans. I mean, we have these examples in in society now of women who they're usually mothers. They're not usually men, but sometimes it's both parents who are engaging in this subterfuge of calling their son a daughter or their daughter a son. It's a very odd thing, and they're doing things about it too. And I find that.
Did you ever see that bit from Sacha Baron Cohen when he was he was on one of his alternate personalities, and he went on like the Jerry Springer type show. Might have been the Jerry Springer show. Anyway, he had his baby with him, and he had a T-shirt on, and it was Gaby. He said, "Yeah, this is my baby. He's gay. I call him he's Gaby," and the audience was just regular like suburban like housewives and black women. They were like horrified. Why are you calling that baby gay?
I have not seen that. I have a hard time with Sacha Baron Cohen. I prefer his cousin, Simon Baron Cohen.
I do too. But sometimes he has something that's memorable, you know.
Yeah, I've never been able to watch his movie other than Hugo, which is not when he's playing, as when he's actually an actor.
Yeah, the movies I find are pretty bad, but some of his bits on his show, when he used to have that show.
I didn't know he had a show.
Yeah, I think that's how it started. It was called the Ali G Show, and he played this.
Oh, okay.
The problem I have with him is half of his humor is just basically deceiving people, right? He pretends to be someone he's not. He gets them to do and say stupid things, but it's because he's lying to them. And it's not really that revealing usually. I think actually Trump actually immediately recognized it was a fraud and just walked out of the one when he got him that time. And Trump takes credit for that.
I understand Ron Paul got in a weird situation with Cohen.
Yeah, I think that's right.
In Borat, but I've not seen it. I couldn't watch it. I just don't like that kind of thing. Probably for the same reason I'm not trans acceptant, is that it seems like fraud.
And yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah.
And in fact, with Gaby, we have actually an example.
Fraudulent.
What?
I'm just saying, if you're gay, you're not defrauding anyone. You actually, you're not pretending to be something you're not.
Right. But trans, you are. Now, I'm not saying people can't play whatever they want to. It's just that there are problems here that we don't see in among gays, and that these problems should be acknowledged.
What do you think about how would you, in your own opinion, compare the transvestite thing versus the transsexual thing? Like say the RuPaul, like this drag show kind of stuff he has, and apparently it's popular. I don't get that at all personally. I don't understand it. I don't know why people find that amusing or funny or interesting at all. But they're not really pretending to be women. They're just dressing the way they want to dress. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I used to know, when I was young, I knew a lot of these people. And
Okay.
I haven't interacted with them in many years, decades really, and I don't really have any opinions on it. I don't have any opinions on. I don't see why they're doing it, but I don't see why a lot of people. I don't see why people like rap or why they like most country western music. I just don't get it.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so there's a lot of things I don't need to get everything. That's one of the great things about
Yeah. Yeah.
a life in a diverse society is you don't need to get everything and you don't need to like everything. In a
Yeah.
monoculture,
That's kind of my take.
then there's a problem.
If what? Say that again.
In a monoculture, that becomes more problematic. And that's kind of where many people are coming from, is that they expect to be living in a monoculture. They have a very strong culture with what they call it, a positive ethnocentrism, and then
Mm.
negative ethnocentrism, where they don't like something that's not theirs. Yeah, I don't really have that. That's
Or
not my.
when they try to back up things with the force of law, that's when it starts to me
Oh,
uh,
sure, sure.
getting to be a problem.
Oh, sure.
Um,
However, certainly the attitudes of positive and negative ethnocentrism have a huge effect on human society throughout history. I mean, this is pretty obvious, and these play out in many different ways. One of them being that racism is a substitute for ethnocentrism. This whole talk about race. There's a number of people in the alt right who are trying to get you and me to be very interested in being white.
right.
And I don't really
Right.
care about being white. For one thing,
Right.
if I have any group identity that's not based on what I like, then it's probably my Finnish ancestry, right?
Right.
And you come from Louisiana. I hear you talk about Louisiana things a lot. That means
Yeah.
more to you than being white does, I assume.
Yeah. Uh, but I wonder if that's sometimes because I'm an individualist, which is why I'm a libertarian, or vice versa. Yeah. No, I do think that this white thing um, is an understandable backlash against the ridiculous double standards of reverse racism and all the stuff we've had for a couple decades now,
Oh,
right?
sure, sure.
So what do you expect when you start balkanizing people and treating people into by their tribal in by their gender, by their sex, sorry, not by their gender. Well, I don't even know which one it is anymore. But you know,
Or the race,
I mean, when
in
you
this
have
case.
explicit affirmative action and quotas and oppression against white males legalized, then you're going to have to expect the backlash, and people are going to get fed up with it, and that's what you're going to have. That's what's happening.
Yes.
I don't like all these alt right, alt white, alt light people, whatever. It nauseates me. I've never liked that, but I understand it, and they're no. In a way, they're no worse than the race hustlers, on the other side.
In a sense, they are race hustlers. They're just a different side.
Yeah, but I mean, from what I've heard, a lot of these alt people, they're not all they're not all white nationalists in the sort of old uh, like KKK sense. They like I don't some of them, yeah, they want the world to be all white and Aryan like Hitler or something, but some of them just want to be left alone. Like, let's have our white tribe, you have your black tribe, and we think we're better. If you think you're better, that's okay with us. Let's see who does better. I mean, it's almost a live and let live tribalist attitude. Again, I don't like it. It doesn't appeal to me. It I think it's something weird, but I understand why it came about. It also it seems to me that um, it tends to be the attitude expressed by people that are generally lowly educated. Like people that are frustrated, right?
Right.
Maybe I'm mischaracterizing it, but I would say country people or uneducated people, blue collar types. It tends to be among the ignorant types. But again, what else would you expect? A stigmatized, unpopular movement's going to get appeal among people that have little to lose, which is what we call a loser. And that might be wrong. There are some alt right people that are kind of educated, and
Oh, Jared Taylor is a very cultivated man.
Jared Taylor,
So,
Richard Spencer, they're pretty erudite, and
and I don't really have any problem with people wanting to live among their kind. I'm all for it. I think people should. I actually don't have a problem even with segregation if it's not legal. I mean, if people want
Right,
to live
of
among a
course.
community like they have, that's no problem with me. I don't even see why
Well, and
anyone should
people,
care.
and that's what people do. I mean, this is, I've never seen it not happen. We still have segregation to this day. Hispanic neighborhood, Chinese neighborhood, black neighborhood, white neighborhood. But like, say in my white neighborhood, there's a few blacks, and no one even bats an eye because they don't have a problem with it. But you sort of know what it is. I mean, America, people think of it as a Christian country. Turkey's a Muslim country. Okay, you can have people that are minorities within those countries, and they usually get along fine.
Yeah. Though, once again, I mean, Muslim countries right now are going through a resurgence of hyper ethnocentrism with negative interest. Even
Well, I was
Turkey's.
going to ask you, what do you think about the phenomena of Muslim women in the West wanting the so-called freedom to wear their hijabs and their niqabs and all these kind of beekeeper outfits and everything? I mean, there is something a little bit disconcerting about. Of course, you have the right to do what you want, but do you really think they want to be basically treated like second-class citizens in that sense, even in the West?
Well, some of the leaders kind of do, but even Ilhan Omar doesn't wear, the full regalia or whatever
Right.
the burqa, the hijab. She's doing whatever she's doing, the scarves and that kind of stuff, because she's in public and she can't. I mean, you can't be in Congress with a burqa. I mean, that's just not going to work. Before the current ideological divide really became strong, like 10 years ago, my attitude was, well, if you want to wear, full garb, that's fine in America. That's fine. I have no problem with it. But then I should be able to wear a mask in public. And now with the COVID situation, masks are almost obligatory. We're going to get to the point where we'll be able to scuttle the thing that I dislike right now most about the surveillance state is their ability to track everybody by their faces. So I'm actually looking at the bright side of the mask wearing, because
Yeah.
it's giving us it's equalizing everything, and it's going to really put a monkey wrench into the NSA's plans. And
Yeah, I can see that. Although I think I heard that there are some states or jurisdictions where one of the requirements to have a concealed carry weapon is you can't wear a mask, right? Something like that.
oh, okay,
So the right to bear arms is, in a way, conditioned upon you not wearing a mask. But then if the government requires you to wear a mask, then that means you can't carry a gun.
now what they really mean is they can't conceal carry a gun, right?
Well, I don't. I think it was. I think the example I heard was a concealed carry, but I'm just saying that
Right.
the government's grudging allowing of your right to bear a weapon could be conditioned upon this mask thing, and then they just make you wear a mask. So that means that, I guess, they're basically saying you're violating a law if you carry a licensed weapon while abiding by the mask law. You know?
That's an interesting twist I've not thought of before.
So that could be a constitutional challenge, actually, to the mask law. You
For
could say,
sure.
well, the Second Amendment fundamental right is more fundamental than this, and blah blah blah. But who knows?
The masks, I'm not on board with the masks anymore, as we talked about before we started hitting the record button. One thing that you and I have talked about a number of times in the past, online, but never in person, has been the thick versus thin libertarian issue, which we broached briefly earlier. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that little controversy today? I mean, the idea is that the thick position is that to have a free society, you have to have a whole bunch of other institutional norms and mores in society, kind of socially enforced and common, and that this is an important part of libertarianism. I sort of accept the first part, but don't accept the second part.
That's kind of where I am, and it's so. In other words, I don't think that's what. So I don't think thickism. The thing that advocates of thickism advocate is not the common sense observation that to have a free society, we need more than just people that believe in liberty. Okay. Everyone knows this. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they're saying more than that, and it's the more than that part that I disagree with. I've always disagreed with it.
And what is that more than? I don't
I
even understand the what's more than that. What is the?
well, and so that's part of the problem. I'll tell you what I think it means, but I disagree with Thickism almost for the same reasons I disagree with the left right spectrum, but that I reject the spectrum anyway. Like I don't, as a libertarian, I don't think. Well, I used to not think this. I mean, I've changed my view on this, but I think you can distinguish left versus right in some ways. The more I've come to think about it, I think lefties are more egalitarians and conservatives are more realistic about how nature and human society works. But in practice, they can both become different types of socialists, right? They can have different types of governmental or institutionalized oppression against people. So from the libertarian point of view, strictly speaking, it's just not that interesting of a distinction, left versus right.
I don't think it's an ideological distinction. I think it's a cultural and operational distinction. It's orthogonal to what we're concerned about generally as force and freedom and that kind of thing, whereas that's something different, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I think for the thick thing, I almost resent like them trying to make me choose. Like, are you thick or thin? It's like I feel like they're giving us a false dichotomy or a false choice, right? For example, just like you said earlier, to have a free society, we need various things to be in place, or to have a good society, right? To have
well, all societies do have more than just their laws, right?
Yeah. So for example, I don't think you can have a good society or a free society if people can't communicate with each other. Like, so you have to have language, and I don't think you can have reason. You can't have it if people don't have reason, and you can't have reason without logic, and you can't have logic without consistency and valuing the truth, and some kind of commitment to honesty and decency. So there's all kinds of things, and I think you can't have a good society if people don't understand history, right? And if they don't have technology and production, engineering, mathematics, economics. So all these things are important, and they're all related. And to be a good economist, you have to understand logic, and you probably need to know something about history. And to be a good historian, you probably need to know something about philosophy, right? And language. So all these things are distinct conceptually, and they're all important, and they're all related. The fact that the thickers want to take credit for this kind of insight, I find insulting. This is something everyone knows. So all the things they want to take credit for, they don't deserve credit for. They're just common sense insights. And then they try to put them together into this therefore. So they use these vague words like your commitments. Like, as a libertarian, we're against aggression, but again, like I mentioned earlier, that's because you're against people being pushed around or bossed around. So they'll use this vague, equivocal term and try to equate it and get you to admit to that. And then they'll say, and therefore you're against other cases of people being bossed around. And your commitment to liberty entails a commitment to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what are you trying to say? I mean, it's like they want to have it both ways. They tend to admit, at least the strict ones, they will admit that, okay, your legal rights should depend only on the non-aggression principle. But that's not the only commitment that we have, or something like that. So I think it's all nonsense, to be honest. Anything they have to add, it's sort of like what someone said of Hayek one time. You might be more of a Hayek fan than I am, but they said something like, everything he said that was true and good was already in Mises, and everything that wasn't already in Mises that he said was just not true and good or right. Basically he contributed nothing. Now, I don't think that's actually true. I think in capital theory he might have, but on the other stuff, that's kind of my view about Hayek. Like, to the extent he was like Mises, he was just repeating that in a different way, and that's fine. And to the extent he wasn't, he was wrong. I mean, that's kind of a dismissive way of but it's just an example. And I sort of think the same thing about thickism. So I don't think it adds anything to anything. I mean, what are they saying? That if you're a libertarian, you're supposed to be, uh, I think ultimately they're saying you should be uh, opposed to capitalism, right? Because you should be in favor of opposed to exploitation, basically, right? And hierarchies. So they oppose the natural order. They oppose bosses being natural elites. They oppose bossing people around. They oppose alienation of people's labor. They tend to be Marxian sometimes in thinking of that the capitalist class is exploiting the surplus value of the workers' labor, or at least that's implied by their vision of their utopian future world where there's no more firms or capitalists or employment or hierarchies or that like they think that this is all uh, a relic of the state corporatism, right? Support of corporatism. And again, most of these guys are against corporations, which again is not a clear. The corporation is just one form of business organization. It's not really what they're against. They're against what they call big business. I mean, you can have a 2-person corporation or a 1-person corporation. So what they're really against is what they call big business, which means they're against the modern way industry and Western free markets have been organized for the last couple hundred years. And I guess they have a view that it's heavily distorted and caused by government interference, whereas we more capitalist types think that no, it's a distorted market, but capitalism is natural and good, and we don't have complete capitalism because the government is holding it back. So I guess they think the government props up capitalism, whereas we think it holds it back.
And we're talking here about people like Kevin Carson, who is, I mean, he's on that edge. He seems to be embracing elements almost of Marxism, certainly Proudhonian economics, right? He's in that crowd.
I think so. I mean, he has these so-called jokes about the guys at the C-suites being guillotined, and he seems to really despise these guys. And I have more of a Randian view of the sort of pristine, heroic nature of entrepreneurship and capital accumulation and businesses. And I think Roderick Long actually kind of does too, which is why he admires Rand so much. So he won't go quite along with that. And then I think there's a bit of confusion on the labor stuff. So like Carson is actually good on intellectual property, and so is Roderick, which means that they're not taken in by this labor theory of value mistake, which I think underlies a lot of the Marxian exploitation ideas. And yet some of the left guys still believe in this exploitation idea, right? So I honestly don't know. I can't figure it out. I can't figure out why intelligent people who believe in liberty want to have anything to do with these. I think I'll always hate communism and the left. I have a soft spot in my heart for. I mean, let me ask you this: what do you think about Trump versus Biden? I mean, do you have yourself as a radical libertarian any preference as to who you'd prefer to win?
Well, I think Biden would do more harm from my cause if he got his way. Certainly Kamala Harris. Actually, it's not between Biden and Trump, because I don't think that's a live issue. I think it's between Kamala Harris and Trump, because Biden is going to be.
I don't think Kamala Harris personally is some ideological Bernie Sanders any more than Biden is. I think they're both.
But she's also, what I see her is she's very, very almost evil. She's an opportunist who will say anything and do anything to get ahead, and that's pretty much demonstrated.
Yeah.
And Trump will do a lot of things to get ahead in business, but he seems to have some sense of limits on what we should do in government. So, I mean, mainly I'm against any group of people who supports the riots, and
yeah.
And because that I consider as a typical left move, because I don't think left
Well,
and right are separated on policy. I think they're separated on how they deal with hierarchies and the in groups and out groups. And rioting
well,
is an
yeah,
aspect of anarcho tyranny, which is a left move.
yeah. I think there's something to that. My fear about the election is not actually Kamala or Biden themselves. It's just the fact that the Senate probably will go that way too. And then once they have the Congress and they're going to be beholden to these interests, and they're going to do the Green New Deal. They're going to go insane on taxes. Spending's going to go crazy. The deficits are going to get out of control, and all these SJW things are going to happen. It's just at free college, all this crap. Like for some reason, you can't imagine Obama or Bill Clinton doing that, but it seems like in today's era, the left is ready to just seize on their chance to just go crazy. Um, and whoever's the Democrat president is just going to go along with it.
It might be true, and I do fear that, but I also think it's possible because Kamala Harris was selected by the DNC and the elites. They want her very much. And that's because they know they can deal with her. And she can do is that she can betray the leftists. I believe that's part of the deal is that they have another agenda, their corporatist agenda. I need to interrupt this podcast for a moment to share a word from our sponsor. And today's sponsor is UFOs. Okay, what am I talking about here? Well, it turns out in the middle of this long conversation with Stephan, the subject got into UFOs. This is an interest of mine of a fairly recent nature, but I've done a lot of research on it, best as I can do, and a lot of thinking. And so I applied it. And I tried to convince Stephan that the subject wasn't silly and that it was actually important. And it is not quite what we always thought it was. Because Stephan and I come from the same background, the skeptical background. That's where we're both coming from. But things are changing, and we're learning more about UFOs. And I thought I should mention it. But it's not really appropriate for this podcast, so I cut it out of the conversation and I placed it onto locofoco.locals.com. That's the fan site for Locofoco Netcast. So if you want to hear me talk and try to explain to Stephan Kinsella what the nature of UFOs in our time, go to locofoco.locals.com. And let's call it our sponsor. And if I ever get a payment system in there, you can even give me money for this great service. Heh. And you were talking about capitalism and anti-capitalism as latent between the left libertarians and the right libertarianism.
Yeah.
I always thought this was heavily related to you have to be anti-racist to be a libertarian. You can't be just a libertarian. You have to be anti-racist as well. You have to have this other thing, this basic anti-racist attitude. Otherwise, you won't have a free society. And I'm not saying that's not true. I'm just saying it's different.
Well, I think even Ayn Rand hinted at this or said something similar, right? When she argued that she tried to find the common roots of what you would call collectivism or socialism, and it was like tribalism, right? And irrationalism or something like that. Because if you're a fully rational man, you would be individualist and you wouldn't be tribalist at all. And so you wouldn't be racist and you wouldn't be a collectivist. So she tried to identify some common things there. And I used to like that and sympathize with that. And I still do, I think, to some degree, at least in my attitude. Look, I like humans. I like humanity. I'm glad I'm part of society. I'm glad that we're advanced as we are. And we're not living in on the plains anymore and living in caves or in the trees. And I like human culture and human society. And so I tend to like and value other people Yeah, we have proclivities towards our own types and our own culture and our own ethnicities or whatever. Um, but I, I and I don't think this is incompatible with libertarianism. I don't know if it's necessarily part of it to be an open-minded, cosmopolitan person who likes humanity and to value other humans in general, despite their differences, or maybe because of their differences. So that's my attitude. I don't think I've ever been one of these tribalist types. But again, I would never have said that anti-racism is part of libertarianism. I don't think it is.
Yeah.
I guess you get down to a definitional thing. What's the definition of libertarian? What does it mean? What does it mean to be a libertarian? I don't think it's possible to be a libertarian if you don't speak a language, for example. But that doesn't mean that speaking a language is part of libertarianism. Those are different phenomena, right? So, um, I don't. I think it's hard to imagine someone being a libertarian if they're a misanthrope, if they just hate humanity. But logically, you could be. Okay, so what? And so I think so part of the problem again is like the dichotomy I noted before is the division between people who are interested in liberty in a contemplative way, more of an intellectual way, and people that are activists. So the activists, they want to achieve something, and they're impatient and they're urgent and determined to do that. Most of them think you do that by voting or by haranguing your relatives and everyone you meet and passing out pamphlets or whatever. Um, and so those people are going to tend to um, they're going to tend to include in libertarianism for what they see as libertarianism the activist aspects of it, right? Which means persuasion, which means persuading other people, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to tend to start equating um, things that they think would be a successful strategy or approach as part of libertarianism because they don't distinguish the two. For them, libertarianism is the 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 attempt to achieve liberty and the activism to achieve it. And I think it's just not. That's not what libertarianism is. So then that's the question: is what is it? What's the word mean? What does the concept refer to? Why do we use it? What is it describing? And I think it simply describes a set of beliefs about justice and law that is distinct from other sets of beliefs about justice and law. That's what I think it is. We believe certain laws should be in place, should be enforced. Certain laws are just, certain laws are unjust. That's basically what we believe in. And by law, I mean the more official institutional enforcement mechanism in society that refers to interpersonal relationships, how people should deal with each other, but not just merely interpersonal relationships, because that can also include manners and morals and things like that, which is not part of political philosophy. So, and some people have radically different views on this. Fascist, populist, Democrats, socialist, democratic socialists, communists, totalitarians, theocrats, and libertarians. And so we use different words to describe these different sets of beliefs. So I think that's what the word is. And then you can argue among ourselves about the particular details of it and how far to go and how extreme to go or whatever. But to then say it includes an opposition to oppression in general, or to dishonesty or lying or whatever they want to broaden it to include, it's like a dishonest debating trick, I think.
Yeah,
They have their own personal preferences outside of libertarianism proper, and they want to persuade you of that, and that's perfectly fine. I might want to persuade you to listen to classical music instead of country, but I don't pretend like I'm doing that as a libertarian to a fellow libertarian. Like, listen, we're both libertarians, so if you're a libertarian, you should like classical better than country, because that would just be a stupid argument and plus a dishonest one. But the closer one, the ones that they bring in values that are closer, like, most libertarians I know have some knowledge of economics, and we integrate economics with it. And we're humanitarians in some kind of sense because we value other people. Those are all true. But if you just kind of blend them all together and mix them into a big mushy thing and try to use that to get people to adopt your view of these non-libertarian or a-libertarian ideas, it just seems to me dishonest. Just make an argument. Make an argument as a human being, appealing to some common shared values or whatever, but don't pretend that it's libertarianism. It's not. Geometry is not algebra. Physics is not chemistry. They're related, but they're not the same thing. So that's basically my take on thick and thin. I think thickism is totally useless, to be honest, and I dislike it, as I think I've made clear.
I'm pretty much on your side on this one, which is not really all that surprising. But I do have a sort of historical question, because you have many friends within the Mises Circle groups, and they were heavily involved in paleo-libertarianism in the early 90s. And that, to me, seems like a thickist movement.
You're kind of right. There is an aspect of thickism to that, too. I suppose I don't abhor it as much because it's not as lefty. So I guess really... But they didn't call it thickism. They didn't say that libertarianism means this. They did more than one thing at once. They were walking and chewing gum at the same time. I'm not opposed to that. We all do that.
Yes.
And so I don't think they made quite the mistake of conflating libertarianism with the cultural values. They made their argument that to have a successful libertarian society, you need certain institutions in place and certain characteristics of the people, etc.
Right.
They may be right, but that's not pretending that libertarianism includes this. Now, when they call it paleo-libertarianism, to me, that's just an adjective that describes the different type of libertarianism. Like, they're the ones who preferred cultural conservative values. So I guess it doesn't bother as much. Although I will say that it seems to me that we've had, in a way, 3 waves of paleo-libertarianism. Like, so we first had fusionism, right? The Frank Meyer stuff. And then we had the paleo-libertarianism of the Mises people and the what was the Chronicles magazine?
The paleo-conservatives. The alliance with Thomas Fleming.
Yeah, there's I forgot the name of the group. That's actually my first conference I ever went to, was in 1994. I went to an objectivist conference in '88 in Dallas. But other than that, my first real conference, I went to in 1994 in November. I met Rothbard in Crystal City, Virginia, next to DC. It was the Paleo-Cons and the Paleo-Libertarians. But I went there. I was living in Philly. I took the train down, and I wanted to meet Hoppe, and I met Block and Rockwell and Rothbard. I had a conversation with Rothbard, and then he died 2 months later, so I got to meet him. But I was very uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable by the Paleo-Cons, the Sam Francis kind of guys, and Tom Fleming. There was something, I was from Louisiana, but I never like all these guys that have the foghorn leghorn kind of accent, and they have the pipe and the cigars and the stars and bars and all this kind of almost neo-Confederate stuff. I'm not saying it was like that, but it was something about it that I was like, I didn't come here for these people, And of course they broke apart right after that. But anyway, I think that was the second phase, fusionism, and then paleo-conservatism, the paleo movement, the kind of merger, the failed. And then I think we've had, like, even the Mises Institute and Hoppe and these guys, like the Property and Freedom Society, which I go to, they sort of trying to do that a little bit again. And then you have the alt-right. which is not really, it's more like an offshoot of that, I think. So I find the whole thing fascinating that people don't connect these dots. It seems to me that there's like, again, when people talk about the paleo movement, why don't they talk about fusionism? Like, have they not even heard of the Frank Meyer thing and the earlier attempt to do that? And it could help explain to some degree Rothbard's apparent seeming gyrations between the left and the right. I think he was making his way through these different attempts at strategy. Anyway, I don't consider myself a paleo or a conservative even. I don't know. I don't think you do yourself either, although I'm not sure.
Oh, I've never been a
And
paleo.
you're not.
I mean, you and I both have sort of somewhat conservative values. I mean, certainly I have a lot of attachment to the Western tradition of high civilization.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
I'm kind of a fanatic about this subject, though I live kind of a boho life in a sense.
Yeah.
I also have a very conservative life in a sense, but that's not really
Well,
relevant
but
to my political philosophy, other than it informs how I think about things.
but you could say that the West is also liberalism, right? In a
Yes.
broad sense, which I don't know if that's conservative or not, but and then you could also say, like, look, let's say we have a Western priest in America. He's a minority type of guy. He's ascetic. He's not making a lot of money. He doesn't have a wife and kids. He's accepted in the community, but he is surviving off of that community in it, and he probably loves it. Like, if he's a decent priest, and like he's not offended by the fact that most of his parishioners are married couples that are heterosexual married couples. You know what I mean? It's like you can have people that don't do all the things that is the average or the norm in a society, who still like to be part of it and don't mind being part of it, and who value it.
Yeah, I
Your boho kind of thing. I mean, so what?
exactly. I think that the real difference between right now between cultural left and cultural right is that the progressives have abandoned any sense of gratitude and appreciation for the people who actually live normal lives and pay taxes and basically are the bulwark of the civilization. I mean, they're the ones producing the kids and who
Yep.
are transmitting a culture.
Right. I totally agree. And that's my point about the priest. Like, the priest knows that he's, I won't say parasitical, but he needs there to be people that procreate and have kids and have jobs and earn the money that give donations to the church. So he's not sitting here denouncing. It's like the Ayn Rand thing, like the Atlas Shrugged idea. Like, if you're Atlas holding up the world and they keep pushing down on you and criticizing you for holding them up, you shrug and you let the world collapse. It's that kind of great idea.
Yeah, except that we have a lot of people who are pushing down who think they don't need. I mean, these people who, I mean, it's very weird for the progressives because mainstream conservatism is just a variety of progressivism. We've always known this because they like the main institutions. They're not fighting against Social Security, really. They like the main institutions, but they always had gratitude about the people who paid taxes and they honored people who did things. Progressives today don't seem
Exactly.
to have that at all. They seem to hate them. And they think that
No, it's just the Obama thing. You didn't build that. You didn't build that, so you can't complain if we tax you.
this is where I'm actually the most conservative because I think that attitude is actually about as evil as anything in politics today. It's
Yeah,
malign and it's destructive.
yeah, I agree with you.
So
I think we're on the same page here.
yeah, so I don't consider myself either right or left, and I think it's important not to be right or left in politics for a libertarian. However, I like rightists now more than I like leftists because leftists seem to abandon parts of civilization that I think can't be abandoned.
Well, yeah. So I heard an interesting conversation the other day. It made me think. It was about this cancel culture that we have now, which I think is completely insane, and it's a leftist thing. But someone said, "Well, we had cancel culture in the '50s with McCarthyism, and there's a point. I mean, you could also say that, like, Islam is horrible, and people say, well, Christianity was just as bad. It's like, well, I don't know if they ever was just as bad, but they were worse in the past. but now they don't have power and they're more tolerant. And so today, like, I think Islam is far worse than Christianity today, because Christianity has been integrated with Western sort of cosmopolitanism or whatever, And likewise, maybe the conservatives in the past were as bad as the liberals are now, but right now it's the left that's horrific, with this cancel culture kind of stuff and this SJW stuff, and it's the right that seems to be more tolerant. And I know lefties and liberals, when I say this, they don't see it that way, or they can't see it that way. But that's the way it seems to me. And I feel like I'm like an outsider because I'm a libertarian. So I'm not either one. But it seems to me that which is again why I asked you, so I'm not indifferent as to who wins. I hate to say it, but I hope Trump wins. I hate to say it. But I'm really terrified of Biden, Kamala winning. I'm terrified of it.
Yeah, the only good thing about them winning, in my opinion, is that the riots will stop.
Well, if they win and the Republicans somehow maintain control of the Senate, then I'm not too worried. But if they get control of the Senate and the House and the presidency, I think it's going to be I hate to say the end of America or something, but I'm a little worried that it could presage that. I didn't feel that way about Hillary or Obama or Bill Clinton. I didn't feel that way, but I feel it now, and maybe it's just emotional. But
I think it's partly because of Hillary and Obama didn't have huge movements behind them that hate America and hate freedom as we know it. They hate freedom.
I don't. They would not have talked about a Green New Deal.
Yes.
Well, maybe I'm free. This whole thing about free college for everyone and forgiving student loans. What the hell are they even talking about? It's just like,
well, there's certainly no limits to what they'll talk about, but I don't know. And that's the only good thing about this is we do have to remind ourselves that talk can sometimes be cheap, and you don't necessarily get everything you want.
Well, I'm hopeful that the Democrat machine, the real power players behind the scenes, have a little bit more sense, and they're going to only have a slow crawl towards this socialist utopia that these guys want. That's my only hope, is that they know that if they raise taxes to 75%, it's going to kill the country and it's going to be a disaster. But I really don't know. I think so many of them are so stupid, and the people that vote for them are so stupid, so economically illiterate. They have no clue.
They're also cultists. They're tribalists and cultists, and they really don't have any respect or even knowledge of opinions they don't hold. I have friends who are Democrats on Facebook, and they're relentless on just a few things, and they don't have any sophistication about what's going on in the world. They really are. These are old people older than me, who are supporting SJW stuff, defending riots, making fun of Trump relentlessly. That's what they do. These people are enabling some of the worst ideas in society, and it just strikes me as absurd and really dangerous.
I agree, and I hate to be an alarmist, but or pessimist even, because I'm usually not. But I don't know if I'm a cynic or a realist, but I'm a little bit worried. My only hope is that I still think that as bad as we kind of are, most other countries are worse, and so we're still going to be relatively better, and there'll be some pressure that will keep us afloat until the techno utopia comes and liberates us. Now, if your UFO theory is correct, then that's not going to happen either, because they'll stop that too.
Well, that's an interesting question. What are they up to on that? And I don't know what to say about that. Though I think that this could be the reason for everything could be right there. Is that
it would just mean any predictions we have are not
exactly.
We don't know what to predict because we don't know what's going to come. But no, my hope for several years now has been that that the underlying free market that we have remaining, and along with it, the technological accumulation of knowledge that we have, and the slowly growing expansion of the division of labor and international trade, and therefore wealth of everyone, will gradually lead us to be able to break free of the state, and the state will wither away or become a husk of what it was and not be a factor anymore. I mean, this is my only hope for him. This is why I'm not an activist, because I think it either is going to happen naturally or it won't. But I don't think there's anything we can do to bring it about. I could be wrong. Maybe someone will come up with some super uber idea that will topple the state without causing us to go back to barbarism and have a Mad Max world. I don't know. I mean, cryptocurrency itself could be part of it, you know. Bitcoin. I forgot where you stand on Bitcoin, the Bitcoin type thing, crypto and all that.
I am an enthusiastic, non-aligned spectator.
But it's interesting, right? It's an interesting phenomenon.
It is interesting. It is a very interesting time. Of course, everything about today's social life is interesting. My major concern is the financial instability of the West. And it has been for 30 years. I mean, it's not my expertise, but it's certainly something I'm concerned about. And and as I told Robert when I interviewed Robert, I don't know if you watched that episode or listened to that episode.
Robert
Wicks.
Oh no, I didn't see that.
Well, I gave a theory that one of the reasons everything's so crazy right now is that on some deep level, everybody knows that our system is unsustainable and we have this rapidly increasing debt, but we don't know what to do about it. That there's culturally, politically, no one has the will to do anything about it. And
correct.
Because of that, people have gone crazy and gone off in these weird directions. That's just a theory I have.
And the COVID thing has helped unleash the remaining limits we had on insane spending. It's like, okay, $7 trillion here. So when the Democrat comes into office, they're going to be like, well, so what if we have a $17 trillion Green New Deal and free university tuition thing that increased the deficit? Apparently, the deficit doesn't matter. You didn't think it mattered 2 years ago when you voted for the COVID crap. So there are going to be no shackles on. That's what I'm worried about. Actually, I'm worried that this will unleash them. And then, you know, libertarians have been saying this for 40 years. Like, oh, this debt is crazy. It's unsustainable. It's going to result in a collapse at some point, and it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened visibly. I think it has happened imperceptibly. But anyway.
Well, that's an interesting problem because, in a sense, the whole financial system has been dealt with rather like how Social Security has been dealt with several times. It is bankrupt, and so they completely refigure the deal. And they do a lot of shifting. They do a lot of shifting, and what the general upshot for Social Security is that it's meant that we've all been overburdened more than our parents' and grandparents' generations have been. And we've diverted a lot of resources away from ourselves and our families towards other families, and also to fund continual minor league warfare.
Well, then if you think about this like a psychological, it's almost like the gaslighting concept, like when you sort of like make someone think they're. So if you think about it, we have this weird thing where there's this kind of subtle recognition in society that the World War II generation was the so-called greatest generation. And nowadays we have a bunch of slackers and millennials, right, and losers who are living with their parents in their basements. But the reason we have these problems is because of the accumulated crap that started with the FDR World War II generation, like the crap that they voted for.
Yeah.
And now we've ruined the black middle class with welfare and with the inflation and the draft and wars and the drug war. And the millennials have become sort of spoiled at the same time as having like an ennui about the future because of what we've given them. And they blame them for doing what we've created. So like they've inverted the pyramid. Like they call the guys that caused the problem the greatest generation, and then they blame the victims of it, which is the millennials. Not that I love the millennials and am happy how they're going to vote in the next election, but it's a little bit weird. It's like gaslighting these guys. It's like, yeah, you're losers. You're not the greatest generation. We're giving you this stuff. And then this whole free college thing drives me. It's like I don't even understand how a lefty egalitarian. The theory is that if you go to college, you make more money. So why should the average taxpayer subsidize people to go to college to make more money than them? It's like it's taking from the poor and giving to the rich.
But they don't look at it that way.
This is obvious.
They look at it like everybody is going to go and everybody's going to pay. So it's just like K through 12 education now.
Yeah, I've been thinking that lately. I think it's the expansion of the public schooling mentality. So people say, well, you have a right to go to school and the community pays for it. Yeah, so they do that from K through 12 already with public school. So they're basically just ratcheting public schooling up another 4 years.
Yeah. Well, that's how socialism, as we like to think of it, works, is that you start on the beginning and end of everybody's life, the arc of life. You begin dependent upon your parents, and you end dependent on somebody, and then you die. And the state,
cradle to grave. Yeah.
And the state takes over the cradle, and the state takes over the grave. And progressives are people who want to take over more of the middle arc of life, forgetting that it's the middle arc of life where people actually go out and do things and support the cradle and the grave. So this is just another element of the ratio. They want to up that ratio. They want to have fewer producers and more dependents. And I find that on its face to be insane and stupid. But I understand where they're coming from.
Do you think that's a conservative view or a liberal view or just a common sense libertarian view?
Well, I just said that the idea of ratios is something that I think is a common sense view of the world. And I think libertarians largely.
I mean the fact that you detest that sort of. Would you say that's your conservative side, or do you think it's just common sense libertarianism?
It's kind of both, because I think conservatives are on board on this. Conservatives like cradle and grave socialism. They don't like cradle to grave socialism. Progressives like cradle to grave socialism. I don't like any of it.
Did you come up with that?
Yeah, that's something I've been talking about for years.
And that's brilliant. You should write that up.
Yeah, I should write it up. I have a lot of ideas that I never write up. And considering that I'm writing all the time, that just seems impossible. But anyway.
Cradle and grave. Cradle and grave, but not cradle to grave.
Right. Right. And that's what we have now is we have a bunch of people who don't see the point of the non-socialist sector of the economy. They don't see it. They don't see why it works. And libertarians and conservatives, and this is where we're aligned, we look at them as crazy people because they're just nuts. And they are, because they don't understand the world. But that doesn't stop them. And because productivity is increasing all the time among the people who actually work, because they can support more and more people. Yeah. So we're at Thidwick the big-hearted moose problem, is that, I mean, rather than Atlas Shrugged, you remember the Dr. Seuss story? His great libertarian story was Thidwick the big-hearted moose.
I've heard about it.
Basically, all the animals wanted to cross the river on his antlers, and the more and more animals started living on his antlers. Well, at the end of the year, he just sloughs off the antlers and goes away from all his loafers, and it's the one Dr. Seuss story you almost never see.
Well, actually, the conservatives want to go from conception to grave, right? They want to protect the unborn fetus too.
Yeah, they do, and though sometimes it's just protecting them from people who want to kill them. So I'm not sure it's quite the same thing, but
no, it's not the same. But
there is an element that's a challenge to conservatives, and it's the reason we have abortion. I think is that if conservatives actually in our climate made sure that there weren't very many abortions, there would be a lot more children. But because most of the people aren't getting married for these children, the welfare state would be heavily taxed. So
here's my sort of utopian libertarian. If we had a freer society and a richer society, like let's imagine us 100 years from now, if the alien UFO guys don't succeed in their nefarious schemes, but if we had a freer and richer society, which was more cosmopolitan, less religious officially or in substance, there would be almost no reason to abort a baby. First of all, there'd probably be technology that you just like Oh, just found out I'm 2 months pregnant or 1 month pregnant. Okay, just take it out and give it to someone else. Uh, like you don't need to kill it. You could probably just take it out. But the point is, there wouldn't be a stigma like, oh, you're a pregnant girl, and there'd be tons of people that could adopt it, and you wouldn't have to keep it if you didn't want to. It just seems like abortion would be like almost unheard of in a pro-life. I mean, by that I mean pro-human rights society. In fact, you probably know Victor Coleman or know of Victor Coleman, right?
I know of him. I've read one of his books, The Jehovah Contract.
Which one did you read? Do you
The
remember?
Jehovah Contract.
Oh yeah, that's a cool book. In fact, I want to write a book, and I want to use the same title, but one of my novel ideas is like if we figured out there's a God, we need to find a way to kill him because he's an existential threat to humanity. I mean, he's a murderous bastard, right? He allegedly wiped out humanity after in Noah's flood, etc. And he's threatening us with eternal damnation if we don't do what he wants. The guy is like, from our point of view, even if he's good, he's actually evil because he's an existential threat. So the Jehovah Contract would be a great title, but Victor took it. But he wrote another one called Solomon's Knife, and that one was about imagining a kind of slightly future world where there's something called transoption, which is a medical procedure where if a woman gets pregnant, instead of aborting the baby or having to wait and deliver it and adopt it, you could transopt it. You could transplant it to another woman's uterus or womb who wanted the baby. So it would like it's an ethical sort of dilemma. Like, is there really any excuse anymore to ever abort a baby if you could? And I think like even Walter Block's pro-abortion, what does he call it? Not trespassing.
Evictionism.
Evictionism. Even he says you can evict the baby, and if the only way to do it is to kill it, then so be it. But you have to do it in the safest way possible. And if technology allowed you to transopt it, then you'd have to like give it to someone else. So there would be no more abortions. I don't know where you stand on the abortion issue. I'm not like hyper Christian about it, but I'm way more anti-abortion now than I used to be. Maybe because I had a son, and once you see a little baby growing inside, I mean, no pregnant couple that has a baby coming, they don't call it the fetus. You know, they think of it as their baby, and they do everything they can to protect the health of the mother and have a healthy baby and the whole deal. You know, it's not an emotional, or it's like an emotional stance or argument, but I'm way more anti-abortion than I used to be. Although I still think, you know, it should be legal. And come on.
Yeah, I've become more anti-abortion as time has gone on as well. Partly for reasons you've given, though I've not had children myself, but
right.
But also, I used to make a joke back in the 90s or 80s and 90s about how I enjoyed feminists demanding abortion rights because I wanted to have basically an estoppel card to play when they talked about men being violent. I says, look at women kill more babies than more human beings than anyone else on the planet right now. And you don't have no cause to complain about male violence at this point. And this was a sort of a cynical joke I used to play against in debates, which of course endeared me to everyone. That is, no one. But now I actually regard that as I regard it as kind of serious. Is that I think it has corrupted the left by being so anti-humanist about this thing. Is that they've become less responsibilitarian. They've become less interested in responsibility by being able to kill the projects of their natural sexual intercourse. And I think this is bad. This has been bad culturally for them.
Well, I think so. And you hear stories about some of these women who've had like 23 abortions. They use it as, it's a method of birth control. I'm not saying it's common, but they have such a cavalier attitude towards it. Like, I understand what you do in the private. Look, I think it's almost like the IP. Well, not to get it all comes back to IP, but for me, but
of course it does.
I was going to mention 3D printing, how that's going to help get around patents, just like the internet and torrenting have gotten around copyright. I think that eventually we're going to have like robot surgeons in your basement. And if a woman gets pregnant, no one's going to know. And she wants to go down into her basement and have her robot perform an abortion or take a pill or whatever. It's basically practically no one else's business, really.
Right.
And that's the way it probably should be.
Right.
But the point is, why would you, all right, maybe a week old, maybe a month, but why would you kill a little baby inside yourself when you don't need to, when there's no social stigma, no social approbation, when we're all rich, so there's really no significant cost, when there's other people who want to adopt it, when technology lets you transopt it out or something? Why would you do it? Just, okay, I made a mistake. I did take my birth control or whatever. But okay, I'll learn from my mistake and I won't get pregnant on accident next time. But I'm not going to kill this poor baby. I mean, I was adopted, and the reason I was adopted was because my birth mother, who got pregnant with me when she was 18 years old in Louisiana in 1965, refused to abort me. She could have. So, I'm not saying I have a personal bias, but I'm glad she didn't kill me. I mean, she did the right thing, I think.
Yeah. In a sense, everybody alive now is an abortion survivor. The option was always possible. We could have been killed by not being wanted, and that's why Kanye and others have turned on abortion as well, as they've seen things a little bit differently.
So I have something that always perplexes me. So I think that like the liberals, let's say the Democrats or the Republicans, could easily win the next election by just changing one or two things, but they just never do it. So like the Democrats are insufferably condescending to normal people, and they're just obsessed with abortion rights, like to an extreme. For example, and they're also obsessed with the climate change crap. But if they would just be a little bit less condescending. I mean, the Joe Sixpack guy that voted for Trump, they seem like natural Democrat voters, but they didn't, because they're so sick of being condescended to, and they're horrified by this Hollywood elite abortional demand kind of mentality, something like that, right? I'm simplifying. On the same token, if Donald Trump would come out tomorrow and say, you know what, I've been reflecting on the Black Lives Matter thing, and I do think it's a shame what we've done to the Black culture. We need to convene a council, and I think the first thing we need to do is just legalize marijuana on a federal level. He could probably coast into the office if he would just do that. He would piss off a few evangelicals, but you know what? They're still going to vote for him, because what else are they going to do?
Right.
But They won't do it. And he doesn't give a fuck about marijuana.
Right. Well, he's a teetotaler in every sense.
It's amazing. What's that?
He's a teetotaler. He doesn't take any drugs whatsoever.
No, but he's not like he's not a moral majority type who cares either.
Oh, no, of course not.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, he cares nothing.
He could if he came out for marijuana legalization tomorrow, and if he kind of more full-throated, like, let's withdraw troops from the Middle East kind of thing, more than he's done in sort of like fits and starts, he could probably win. He says, we're going to end the drug war to save Black lives and to stop putting Black men in prison, or something like that. And he could issue 5,000 pardons tomorrow of people in federal prison for nonviolent drug offenses. But they won't do these things that they could let them easily win. Because there's something about politics that draws people towards to be as extreme as they can get away with. So they go to the edge of what they can get away with, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just bizarre to me.
But, it's not just Democrats and Republicans who won't do what I consider just like that. I have the same thoughts you've had right there. Libertarians don't do it either. There are some really important things a libertarian candidate could do to get really interesting attention. Instead, we have JoJo and Spike talking about Black Lives Matter and how it's important to be anti-racist. That's not the way libertarians can get ahead.
What do you think they could do? What could a libertarian do that would make more sense?
Well, for one thing, they could take on the deep state. They could say things that would just be shocking to Americans, and then all of a sudden, light bulbs would pop. They could make people start thinking about things that they don't normally think about because they're outside of what Tom Woods calls the 3x5 card of allowable opinion. And by talking about SJW stuff, Spike and JoJo are actually doubling down on the 3x5 card. And I think that's very bad for libertarians because libertarians offer something different. And if you don't find a way of leveraging your difference, you're doing absolutely no good. There's no USP. There's no unique selling proposition for libertarians right now. And one of the things libertarians could do is exactly what you said.
Well, when I heard Joe Jorgensen talk on Tom Woods' show, I had a negative impression about her from the beginning because I'd never heard of her. And I thought, okay, another whatever. But then she kind of impressed me on the Tom Woods show. She sounded reasonable and intelligent, and I'm sure she is. But then after the Tom Woods show, then she started all this SJW ass kissing, and it's like, oh, come on.
Did you listen to Spike on Dave Smith's show?
I think I did, and I had negative impressions about him before because he was the running mate of Vermin Supreme. Which is just this is the exact libertarian thing I'm talking about. Vermin Supreme was running for LP president. This is, but whatever. And I think he impressed me too. He wasn't as bad as I thought he would be, from what I recall.
Oh, I think he's very smart. He seems really smart, and he's not he's also has interesting things to say, but I just think that his SJW aspects are actually ruining his chance of actually making a difference. Whatever libertarians do, and the drug war has been one of them, but libertarians always approach it in such a lackluster and uninteresting way. They have no guerrilla marketing strengths whatsoever. And
I don't think I heard. I'm not familiar with what Spike has said as SJW. I don't doubt you, but I just haven't paid attention.
Well, they have a lot of Black Lives Matter stuff. They doubled down on that. They were both wearing masks once in a picture. That's the other thing. I think the Libertarian Party people should be against the coronavirus lockdowns. I know they're very, very popular with stupid people and smart people who are easily psyoped, but libertarians have to be we have to be the anti-psyop. And I don't think Libertarian Party people understand that.
I agree with you on the Black Lives Matter thing. I've actually almost come around on it, but I see no problem with just agree. Okay, it's true. Black Lives Matter.
Well, sure.
So let's diagnose the problem. What's causing it's the police and it's the drug war and the various other things, right?
And then Skype gave out on us. So let's wrap this up. This has been an episode of the Locofoco Netcast, which you can find at locofoco.net. I've been talking to Stephan Kinsella, who blogs at stephankinsella.com. That's Stephan with an A in the second syllable. My name is Timothy Workman Virkkala, and I blog at workman.com. That's Workman with an I, not an O. Look me up on locals.com, locofoco.locals.com to be exact. Thanks for giving us a listen.